So in this episode of Servant, we get a surprise visit for Leanne while Sean's out of town, and we probably get one of the most awkward sleepovers I've ever seen. We're going to talk about that and much more. Episode 6 of Servant was titled Rain. Leanne's strange uncle arrives unexpectedly while Dorothy fights to keep her nanny. What's going on, everybody? Elliot back again with my weekly breakdown, recap, and review of the latest episode of Servant. We're talking about episode 6, and we're talking about Uncle George in this episode. Very excited to see you all's thoughts and theories of who this weird, awkward gentleman that looks dead, who he is. We're going to have a fun discussion in this review here, but before we dive into it, definitely consider subscribing to my channel, hit that bell so you can stay up to date with all my Apple TV Plus reviews, my other reviews, and all the fun things that we do on this very channel. And if and when you've seen this latest episode of Servant, I want to know what you all are thinking of this episode. Again, who is Uncle George? Why does he look like he's been dead for 10 years? What's really going on with this fellow here? Let me know you guys' thoughts and theories in the comments. Let's have some fun discussions down there. So let's break down the episode. The episode starts off, we find out that Sean is going on a business trip to cater for the Philadelphia Eagles, but something that also mentioned, that was mentioned in that scene, and I want to get you guys' thoughts on the missing spices. You know, Sean mentions to Dorothy that he's missing some spices. I don't know if that's anything biblical or anything of that nature, what's going on with Leanne. Let me know what you all are thinking, or if that's just a little throwaway line, which I don't think it is, because everything, this whole Sean being a cook and food and things like that, I think are playing into the bigger themes of this story. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. So we see that Leanne gets a letter in the mail and she opens it up, and it simply reads on there in all caps, "I found you." The very next scene, we see the doorbell rings and Leanne opens the door and is greeted by a gentleman and says, "Hello, little flower," which is a very awkward thing to say to someone, especially if this is your niece. He walks in and he says, "Are they here?" And she tells him they're at work, and he asks to see the baby. But before that, we see that this man has holes all up in his shoes. He looks like he's been dead for years. He looks like he hangs out with Beetlejuice on the weekends. This guy looks very awkward and very just weird and like zombie-like. So we get that exchange. They go up and see the baby. And at that point in time, you know, Dorothy comes back and she's introduced to Uncle George. And this is where Uncle George, you know, gives them a gift, gives Dorothy a gift for the baby. And this is where he gives him, I believe it was an elm from a special tree on their field. And it's a puppet of Sean. So I don't know if we got some voodoo stuff going on, because we get more puppets at the end of the episode. But let me know what you are thinking about this special puppet from the special tree on the field. So Dorothy gets a phone call from Sean and tells him immediately, "Oh, we got a special guest." And at this point in time in the season, at first the whole banter between Sean and Dorothy was a little awkward and a little annoying at times, but now it's just flat out hilarious. The response that Dorothy gives Sean and the response that Sean gives back to her, I was just laughing at that point. But in the meantime, you know, as Dorothy's saying, "Oh, he's an old man, he's harmless," you got, you know, Uncle George and Leanne in the other room hearing all this conversation. So again, I'm just loving Dorothy's banter and Sean's banter. So we go and Dorothy's preparing the meal, and, you know, Uncle George grabs her and they pray, which was very weird. But saved by the bell, we get Uncle Julian comes into the mix. I assume Sean called them over to look out for his, for Dorothy. And, you know, Dorothy's going to take care of the baby. And this is where Julian asks George, "Who are you? What's really going on? Tell me who you really are." And this is where George tells him, "I'm just like you. You know, I'm an uncle just like you. And we as uncles have to step up during times of family tragedies. And, you know, I would assume you would step up, and I'm a good guy just like you." So very interesting conversation there. He had to step up and take Leanne in because it was a tragedy due to the family. Very interesting comments. So Dorothy insists that George stay the night. And also, too, let me go back a little bit. At the dinner table, you know, Uncle George tells Dorothy that he wants Leanne to come back because she's needed back home. So at this point in time, Dorothy insists that he stays the night because she wants to come up with a plan to keep Leanne on board, keep him as a nanny. But we have this interaction between Dorothy and Uncle George while Dorothy is setting up the bed. And, you know, he tells her she needs to go back. This home isn't really, you know, I don't feel the presence of, you know, some holiness of things going on. But then, you know, he has mentions to her that she's a little girl, she needs to be with her family. And, you know, Dorothy's like, "Oh yeah, no, yeah, I understand, but she's not a little girl." And this is where Uncle George shows Dorothy a picture that I assume is just laying around the house potentially. And you know, it's a picture of Dorothy and her mom. And Uncle George says to Dorothy, "Oh, how did your mom pass away? Dottie." And, you know, that's a very interesting thing to say to Dorothy, especially meeting her for the first time. How did you know that her nickname was Dottie? She even says, "My mom used to call me that." So, again, talking to the dead spirits? Is he a dead guy? What's really happening here? So very interesting conversation. Dorothy gives Leanne some official contract because she wants her to stay on board, because at that dinner table, the Uncle George said, well, you don't have a contract. She's not really, doesn't have to work here because there's really nothing in writing. But Dorothy, has Leanne sign the paperwork, and then kind of have an emotional exchange there. You can tell that Leanne wants to stay and enjoys Dorothy and Sean's company as well as the baby, so they have a little moment. In the meantime, Sean and Dorothy have another conversation about Leanne and her wanting her to stay and convincing, another funny moment where Sean says, Julian's only 160 pounds and half of that is cocaine. What is he going to do if something pops off with Uncle George and the protection and everything? I thought that was a funny moment. But Uncle George, we notice Julian sleeping on the couch downstairs. He hears a loud noise, and he immediately goes up to, the room where Uncle George was supposed to be, and he's not there. So Julian goes into his sister's room, Dorothy's room, and wakes her up and says, where can he be? And, we need to leave. But Dorothy's like, I'm not running out of my house. No strangers kicking me out of my house. So she looks around the house, goes into the baby's room because she hears the baby crying. And we see baby Jericho on the floor. And lo and behold, you got Uncle George laying in the crib, which was just like, what is going on? So Sean and Julian have a conversation about, this is just awkward now. This is weird. What do we do? And Leanne or Dorothy's like, well, just let him stay in the crib, and I'll take the baby with me, and you go ahead and keep a night watch on this gentleman, and don't lose, have this overnight watch over him. So we go to the next scene, where obviously Julian's sleeping, Uncle George is downstairs eating breakfast, but you notice that Dorothy has a cross on. She's a little bit more cleaned up in regards to trying to maybe present herself as a more welcoming place for Leanne to be. So we see that she leads the prayer at the breakfast, again, showing George that this is a good place for Leanne. And again, you see his fingers, and again, it's like mud and just dirtiness all in his fingers there. George finally leaves after, he tells Leanne to come with me on the train. And Dorothy says no, she's not going. And he immediately cuts her off. But Leanne eventually says, no, I do want to stay here. And they have a very interesting conversation there where he says to her, oh, you really want to stay for her or for this family, and you don't want to help the other family? So very interesting conversation, because again, it's seeming like they're going around from house to house, family to family, doing what they're doing to Jericho maybe. So this seems like could be a very common thing between Uncle George and Leanne. So he decides to leave, but he says, you know what? I'm going to bring Aunt May with me, and, it's very hard for you to say no to her. So it'll be very interesting to see if Aunt May is as awkward and as dead-looking as Uncle George. So very interesting there. And he walks out and says, this is a godless home, and walks out. We see Sean gets back home, and we see Dorothy tells him that she's going to set up a baptism for baby Jericho. And we see at the very end that we get a bunch of different puppets above the baby's bed. Leanne sees her uncle outside of the window in the end of the episode. So a lot of stuff going down. Again, little things that I noticed. Number one, when they were eating at the dinner table, you noticed that Uncle Joe or Uncle George was taking all the seasoning and sauce off of his food. Very interesting. I don't know if that's something, if there's any meaning there. Let me know what you all are thinking there. And also, again, going back to what's going on. Is this an Antichrist situation with the baby? We've had crickets. We've had rain alluding to a flood, the serpent reborn. So a lot of stuff going on, a lot of biblical undertones with the praying and, Dorothy wearing the cross. And obviously we know that Leanne prays every episode. So again, this show hasn't really given us a lot of answers. We're getting piece by piece. It's a slow burn, but I'm very intrigued. I'm still interested in the show. Again, Dorothy and Sean are growing on me. Leanne still is awkward as hell, and we see that runs in the family with Uncle Joe or Uncle George, and very interested to see what this Aunt May has up her sleeve if we eventually see her. So this is episode 6. We got 3 episodes left, or 4 episodes, I should say, 6 or 7, 8, 9, and 10. So I would imagine some things are going to start picking up. We're going to start getting a better idea of what's going on with Leanne. Is it biblical? Is it some witch stuff going on? Are they dead? Are they reborn? What's up with the baby? I want to know you all's thoughts on this episode and what you're thinking for future episodes of this show that I'm very, very intrigued of, and I'm enjoying myself with the show so far. But let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like and share this video. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and definitely make sure that you follow me on all my social media accounts, especially on Instagram. Keep an eye out for the content that I have on my channel right now. Rise of Skywalker new movie on Disney Plus, The Witcher. A lot of content coming for you guys this weekend, so definitely keep an eye out for those videos. Thank you for watching this review, and we'll see you on next week's review of Servant on Apple TV+.